Hi, I'm Lauren Hayes, and 3 months ago, my sister Victoria looked at my newborn son and said the words that still echo in my head. Well, at least he has a good personality to fall back on. She wasn't trying to be cruel. At least, that's what I told myself as I watched her perfectly manicured fingers scroll through her Instagram feed, while my baby Caleb slept peacefully in my arms. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Victoria had always been the beautiful one, the one who turned heads when we walked into rooms together, the one whose opinion on appearances carried weight in our family. So when she wrinkled her nose at the strawberry birthmark that covers the left side of Caleb's face, and whispered to our mother that some babies just aren't photogenic, I believed her. I actually believed that my perfect, healthy miracle baby wasn't beautiful enough for this world. But last Tuesday, everything changed when a woman in a camel coat approached our table at Blue Moon Café, handed me her business card, and said the words that turned my world upside down. Has anyone ever told you that your son has the most captivating face I've seen in 20 years of pediatric modeling? The morning Caleb was born should have been the happiest day of my life. After 18 hours of labor at Providence Medical Center, when the doctor finally placed my son in my arms, the first thing I noticed wasn't his tiny fingers or his perfect little nose. It was the birthmark. A deep crimson patch that bloomed across the left side of his face like spilled wine on canvas, extending from his temple down to his jawline. The medical term is a port wine stain, the doctor explained gently, completely harmless and actually quite common. But as I stared down at my baby's face, all I could think about was how different he looked from the cherub-faced infants in all the parenting magazines I'd been reading for 9 months. Daniel, my husband, was instantly smitten. He kept taking photos with his phone, cooing about how unique and special Caleb was, how the birthmark looked like a painted butterfly wing. But I could see the way the nurses exchanged glances when they thought I wasn't looking. I could feel the weight of their sympathy, their carefully practiced smiles that said, "He's still beautiful," without them having to voice the unspoken despite that hung in the air. When Victoria arrived at the hospital that evening, she swept into the room like she always did, commanding attention in her designer jeans and perfectly applied makeup. She'd driven straight from a brand partnership meeting, she explained, apologizing for being late while simultaneously managing to make it sound like she was doing me a favor by showing up at all. Victoria worked as a lifestyle influencer, one of those people who made 6 figures posting photos of her morning smoothies and afternoon Pilates sessions. She understood aesthetics. She often reminded our family it was literally her job to know what looked good. She held Caleb for exactly 3 minutes. I watched her face carefully, searching for the same wonder I'd seen in Daniel's eyes, the same protective love I felt burning in my chest. Instead, I saw her Instagram smile falter slightly as she took in his appearance. She handed him back to me with a gentle pat on my shoulder and said, "He's going to have such a great personality, Lauren. Some babies are just naturally more photogenic than others, but character is what really matters." The words hit me like ice water. Victoria wasn't being intentionally cruel. She never was. She had a way of delivering cutting observations wrapped in what sounded like kindness, leaving you uncertain whether you'd been insulted or comforted. Our mother, Carol, nodded along approvingly from her chair by the window. Mom had always deferred to Victoria's judgment on matters of appearance and style. After all, Victoria was the daughter who'd been homecoming queen, who'd modeled for local boutiques in college, who now made a living being beautiful online. Over the next few weeks, as we settled into life with a newborn, I found myself becoming increasingly self-conscious about Caleb's appearance. When we went out in public, I noticed the way people's eyes lingered on his face, the way conversations would pause when strangers realized he looked different. I started positioning him in his stroller so the birthmark faced away from foot traffic. I chose angles carefully when Daniel wanted to take family photos. I even found myself researching laser removal procedures online during late-night feeding sessions, scrolling through before and after photos while Caleb dozed in my lap. The Hayes family reunion was scheduled for Labor Day weekend, just 2 months after Caleb's birth. It was an annual tradition, a potluck gathering at the Riverside Community Center, where our extended family would catch up, share photos, and collectively fuss over the newest additions to the family tree. This year, that newest addition was supposed to be Caleb. I'd been looking forward to it during my pregnancy, imagining myself as the proud new mother showing off her baby boy, accepting congratulations and compliments from aunts and cousins I only saw once a year. But as the date approached, I found myself dreading it instead. Victoria had been posting regularly on social media about the upcoming reunion, sharing throwback photos from previous years, and building excitement among our relatives. In every group photo she shared, everyone looked effortlessly beautiful, like our family had been blessed with unusually good genes. I started imagining Caleb in those photos, his birthmark standing out like a sore thumb among all the conventionally pretty faces. 2 weeks before the reunion, Victoria stopped by our house in the Selwood neighborhood, unannounced. She claimed she was in the area visiting a friend, but I suspected she'd actually come to check on us. She had a way of monitoring the family dynamics, positioning herself as the caring older sister, while simultaneously maintaining her role as the family's unofficial aesthetic authority. She found me in the nursery, changing Caleb's diaper while he gurgled happily on the changing table. Victoria leaned against the doorframe, watching us with that same expression she used when evaluating potential Instagram content, calculating, assessing, deciding whether something was worth her endorsement. "How are you feeling about the reunion?" she asked casually, but I could hear the underlying concern in her voice. "I know it can be overwhelming, having everyone want to meet the new baby." I fastened Caleb's diaper and picked him up, automatically positioning him so his birthmark faced away from Victoria. "We're excited," I lied. "He's such a good baby, I think everyone will love him." Victoria smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Of course they will. He's family." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "You know, if you're worried about photos and things like that, I could help you with some editing afterwards. I have some really good apps that can smooth out imperfections. Just for the family album, you know. Nothing dramatic." The offer was presented as kindness, but it landed like a slap. Victoria was suggesting that my baby's face needed to be digitally corrected before it was suitable for family photos. That his natural appearance was an imperfection that required smoothing out. I managed to thank her for the offer without committing to anything, but after she left, I found myself crying in the kitchen while Caleb napped peacefully upstairs. That night, Daniel found me researching laser treatment options again. He sat down beside me on the couch and gently closed my laptop. "Lauren, what's going on? You've been different since Victoria visited." I tried to explain the weight I'd been carrying, the constant awareness of other people's reactions to Caleb's appearance, the way I'd started seeing his birthmark as a flaw instead of a feature. Daniel listened patiently, then took my hands in his. "Our son is perfect," he said firmly. "That birthmark is part of who he is. It's unique and beautiful, just like everything else about him. If other people can't see that, that's their problem, not ours." I wanted to believe him, but doubt had already taken root. Victoria's voice echoed in my head every time I looked at Caleb, her gentle suggestion that some babies just weren't naturally photogenic. I'd started avoiding the mirror when I held him, afraid of what I might see reflected back at me. A mother holding a baby that didn't meet the world's standards of conventional beauty. The week before the reunion, I made a decision that I'm still ashamed of. I called Victoria and told her that Caleb had been fussy and I wasn't sure we'd be able to make it to the gathering. It was a lie, of course. Caleb was thriving, sleeping well, and generally being the easiest baby anyone could ask for. But I couldn't bear the thought of watching our relatives' faces when they first saw him. Couldn't handle another round of carefully diplomatic compliments about his sweet personality, while their eyes avoided looking directly at his birthmark. Victoria was immediately sympathetic, offering to bring us food from the potluck and promising to take lots of photos so we wouldn't feel left out. Her kindness made me feel even worse about my deception, but I was too deep in my own shame to back down. On the day of the reunion, while our extended family gathered at the community center, I took Caleb for a walk through our neighborhood. The September air was crisp and clear, perfect weather for pushing a stroller down the tree-lined streets of southeast Portland. I found myself wandering aimlessly, not wanting to be home where I'd have to answer Daniel's questions about why I'd really decided to skip the family gathering. We ended up at Blue Moon Café on Hawthorne, a cozy little spot with mismatched furniture and local art on the walls. I ordered a chai latte and found a table by the window where I could people watch while Caleb dozed in his stroller. It was the kind of peaceful afternoon that should have felt restorative. But instead, I found myself scrolling through Victoria's Instagram stories, watching highlights from the reunion I was too embarrassed to attend. The photos were exactly what I'd expected. Our beautiful family laughing and hugging, cousins showing off their kids, everyone looking picture perfect in the late summer sunshine. There was a group photo of all the babies and toddlers, chubby-cheeked children, with bright smiles and flawless skin. I stared at it for a long time, imagining Caleb in that photo, wondering if his birthmark would have been digitally smoothed out, or if he simply would have been cropped out entirely. I was so absorbed in my phone that I almost didn't notice when someone approached my table. A woman in her 50s with silver hair and a beautifully tailored camel coat had stopped beside Caleb's stroller. She was looking down at him with an expression I'd never seen before. Not pity or careful politeness, but genuine fascination. "Excuse me," she said, her voice warm but professional. "I hope you don't mind me asking, but has anyone ever suggested that your son might be interested in modeling?" I looked up at her, certain I'd misheard. "I'm sorry, what?" She smiled and extended her hand.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
I'm Patricia Wolf from Pacific Northwest Talent Agency. I specialize in pediatric modeling and commercial work, and I have to say, your son has one of the most captivating faces I've seen in 20 years of doing this job. I stared at her business card, trying to process what she was saying. "You want to use my baby as a model?" Patricia nodded enthusiastically. "Absolutely. The industry has been moving toward more authentic representation, celebrating natural diversity and unique features. That birthmark isn't a flaw. It's exactly what brands are looking for right now. He has such an expressive face, and combined with that distinctive marking, he could be incredibly successful." I felt like the world had tilted on its axis. Here was a professional, someone whose entire career was built on identifying beautiful children, telling me that my son, the baby my sister had deemed unphotogenic, was exactly what the modeling world wanted. "I don't understand," I said slowly. "His birthmark. People usually see it as..." "As what?" Patricia asked gently. "As something that makes him less than perfect? That's old thinking. The parents I work with are specifically requesting children who look real, who have distinctive features that tell a story. Your son doesn't just have a beautiful face. He has a memorable one. That's incredibly valuable in this industry." She went on to explain that major children's clothing brands were actively seeking models who represented the full spectrum of how children actually look, not just the narrow definition of conventional beauty that had dominated advertising for decades. Caleb's birthmark, far from being a disadvantage, could be his trademark feature. "If you're interested," Patricia said, handing me another card, "I'd love to set up a consultation. Bring him in. Let our photographer Tony Marcelli take some test shots. I think you'll be amazed at what we can create together." After she left, I sat in the cafe for another hour, staring at her business cards and trying to reconcile this new information with everything I'd been told about Caleb's appearance. A professional talent scout had looked at my baby and seen potential, beauty, marketability, all the things Victoria had implied he lacked. When I got home, Daniel was in the kitchen preparing dinner. He took one look at my face and knew something had happened. "Tell me everything," he said, wiping his hands on a dish towel. I showed him Patricia's business cards and repeated our conversation word for word. Daniel's expression shifted from confusion to amazement to something that looked like vindication. "So a professional who makes her living identifying beautiful children thinks our son could be a model," he said slowly. "And your sister thinks he's not photogenic enough for family pictures." The contrast was stark and impossible to ignore. I thought about all the times over the past 2 months when I'd positioned Caleb to hide his birthmark, all the nights I'd spent researching removal procedures, all the shame I'd carried about his appearance. And here was objective, professional validation that everything I'd been told was not only wrong but completely backwards. That night after Daniel went to bed, I found myself in Caleb's nursery, studying his face in the soft glow of his nightlight. The birthmark that I'd been taught to see as a flaw suddenly looked different. Instead of something that made him less beautiful, it looked like art, a natural design that made him unique among all the millions of babies in the world. I thought about Victoria's Instagram photos from the reunion, all those perfectly ordinary children who would blend into any crowd. Then I looked at my son with his distinctive marking and expressive eyes, and realized that Patricia was right. He didn't just have a beautiful face, he had an unforgettable one. The decision to call Patricia felt like stepping off a cliff. Everything I'd been conditioned to believe about beauty and acceptability was telling me this was a mistake, that I was setting myself up for disappointment and rejection. But a stronger voice, one that had been buried under months of shame and self-doubt, was telling me to trust what I'd seen in Patricia's eyes when she looked at Caleb. She hadn't been polite or diplomatic. She'd been excited. I scheduled the consultation for the following Thursday, not telling anyone in my family about it except Daniel. I wasn't ready to deal with Victoria's opinions or my mother's concerns. This felt too fragile, too important to subject to their well-meaning but devastating commentary. The Pacific Northwest Talent Agency occupied the entire third floor of a converted warehouse in the Pearl District. The space was modern and bright, with floor-to-ceiling windows that flooded the reception area with natural light. The walls were covered with headshots and portfolio images of children of all ages, ethnicities, and yes, various physical characteristics that would have been considered imperfections just a few years ago. Patricia greeted us personally, immediately dropping to her knees to interact with Caleb, who was alert and curious in his carrier. "He's even more photogenic than I remembered," she said, gently touching his cheek. "That birthmark catches the light beautifully." Tony is going to have so much fun with this shoot. Tony Marcelli turned out to be an energetic man in his 30s with an impressive portfolio of commercial work. He specialized in natural lifestyle photography, capturing children in authentic moments rather than posed formal shots. When he saw Caleb, his reaction was immediate and unguarded. "Oh, wow," he said, reaching for his camera. "Look at those eyes. And that birthmark, it's like nature's own highlighting. This is going to be incredible." The test shoot lasted 2 hours. Tony photographed Caleb from every angle, in different lighting conditions, capturing him sleeping, alert, and interacting with props. Throughout the session, both he and Patricia kept commenting on Caleb's natural camera presence, the way the birthmark added depth and interest to his face, and his expressive features. "Most babies this age are hit or miss for photography," Tony explained as he worked. "But Caleb has this quality where he draws your eye immediately. You can't look away from him. That's not something you can teach or fake. Either a child has it or they don't." When the session was over, Patricia walked us through their process. If we decided to move forward, Caleb would be added to their roster of available talent. They had several upcoming campaigns that would be perfect for him, including a major children's clothing brand that was specifically seeking diverse models for their spring catalog. "I want to be completely transparent with you," Patricia said as we gathered our things. "This industry can be unpredictable, and there are never any guarantees. But based on what I've seen today, and given the current market demand for authentic representation, I think Caleb has excellent potential for regular bookings." Driving home, I felt like I was living in someone else's life. 3 months ago, I'd been hiding my baby's face from strangers. Now I was seriously considering putting that same face in front of professional photographers and potentially in national advertising campaigns. That evening, while Caleb napped, I finally called Victoria. I'd been putting off telling my family about the modeling opportunity, but I needed to process what had happened with someone who understood the industry. "A talent scout approached you at a coffee shop?" Victoria's voice was skeptical. "Lauren, you need to be really careful. There are a lot of scams out there that target new parents." I explained that I'd already researched the agency thoroughly, that they were legitimate and well-established, that the consultation had been professional and comprehensive. But Victoria's doubt was infectious, and I found myself second-guessing everything that had happened. "I just don't want you to get your hopes up," she said gently. "The modeling industry is incredibly competitive, and they have very specific standards. Maybe this woman was just being polite, you know? Sometimes people say things to make parents feel better. There it was again, that careful undermining disguised as protective concern. Victoria wasn't directly saying that Caleb wasn't suitable for modeling, but she was planting seeds of doubt about the professional validation I'd received. By the time we hung up, I was questioning whether Patricia had been genuine or simply flattering a new mother. But then I remembered the excitement in Patricia's voice, the way Tony had immediately started photographing Caleb without any hesitation, the portfolio of diverse children covering the agency's walls. These were professionals who made their living identifying marketable talent. They had nothing to gain by lying to me about Caleb's potential. The next morning, I made my decision. I called Patricia and told her we were interested in moving forward. Within a week, Caleb had his first professional booking, a local children's boutique that was launching a new line of baby clothes. The photographer specifically requested him after seeing his test shots, drawn to what she called his distinctive and memorable look. The shoot was scheduled for the following Tuesday at a downtown Portland studio. As I dressed Caleb in the outfits provided by the boutique, I felt a mixture of nerves and anticipation unlike anything I'd experienced before. This was my son's professional debut, the moment when the world would see what Patricia and Tony had seen, that his birthmark wasn't a flaw to be hidden but a feature to be celebrated. Walking into that studio felt like crossing a threshold I'd never imagined approaching. For months I'd been convinced that Caleb's appearance was something to apologize for, something that needed to be managed and minimized. Now I was voluntarily putting him in front of cameras, trusting strangers to capture his beauty and share it with the world. The transformation in my own perspective was staggering. The same birthmark that had once made me research laser removal procedures was now being professionally lit and photographed as an asset. The same face that Victoria had deemed unphotogenic was being celebrated by industry professionals as exactly what they'd been looking for. As I watched Caleb work with the photographer, gurgling happily under the studio lights, I realized that nothing about him had changed. The only thing that had shifted was my understanding of what beauty actually meant, and who got to define it. For too many months, I'd let Victoria's narrow definition of attractiveness become my own truth. But now I was seeing my son through different eyes that valued uniqueness over conformity, character over conventional prettiness. The photos from that first shoot were stunning. Caleb looked confident and comfortable, his birthmark adding depth and interest to every image. When the boutique shared the photos on their social media, the response was overwhelmingly positive. Parents commented about how refreshing it was to see a real baby in advertising, how beautiful and unique he looked, how the campaign made them feel like their own children could be represented in mainstream media. But it was one comment in particular that stopped me in my tracks. A mother had written, "Finally, a brand that understands that perfect doesn't mean flawless. This little guy is absolutely gorgeous, and that birthmark makes him even more special." My daughter has a similar marking, and seeing this gives me hope that she'll grow up in a world that celebrates her differences instead of asking her to hide them. I read that comment over and over, thinking about how close I'd come to trying to erase the very thing that was now bringing hope to other parents. If I'd followed through with laser removal procedures, if I'd continued hiding Caleb's birthmark from the world, I would have been perpetuating the same narrow beauty standards that had made me ashamed of my perfect baby in the first place. The success of that first shoot led to more bookings. Within a month, Caleb was working regularly, his distinctive appearance making him a sought-after model for brands that wanted to represent authentic diversity. Each new project reinforced what Patricia had told me that day at the cafe, that Caleb's birthmark wasn't something to overcome, but something that set him apart in the most positive way possible. The real test came when Victoria finally saw one of Caleb's professional photos. The boutique had featured him in a full-page ad in Portland Monthly magazine, a beautiful black and white image where his birthmark caught the light like Patricia had predicted. I was nervous about Victoria's reaction, still carrying some residual fear of her aesthetic judgment, despite everything that had happened. But when she saw the photo, her response was immediate and unguarded. "Lauren, this is incredible. He looks like a professional model. I had no idea." She trailed off, and I could see her processing the disconnect between her initial assessment of Caleb's appearance and the evidence in front of her. "You said he wasn't photogenic," I reminded her gently. Victoria had the grace to look embarrassed. I was wrong. I was so wrong. I think I was still thinking in old terms, you know? What I thought people wanted to see instead of what actually looks beautiful. He's absolutely stunning in this photo. It was as close to an apology as I was likely to get from Victoria, and honestly, it was enough. She'd seen the same professional validation I had, and it had shifted her perspective just as dramatically as it had shifted mine. The sister who had once suggested digital editing to fix Caleb's imperfections was now sharing his modeling photos on her own Instagram, proudly identifying herself as his aunt. But the most meaningful moment came a few weeks later, at a family barbecue at my parents' house. Our extended family was there, including several relatives who had missed the Labor Day reunion, where I'd been too ashamed to show Caleb. As I walked into the backyard carrying my son, I watched their faces carefully, prepared for the same diplomatic politeness I'd expected for months. Instead, I was surrounded by genuine admiration. "He's the baby from the magazine ad," my cousin Sarah exclaimed. I saw it at the doctor's office and couldn't stop staring at how beautiful he was. Other relatives pulled out their phones to show me where they'd saved, or shared Caleb's photos, talking about how proud they were to have a model in the family. My mother, who had nodded along when Victoria originally dismissed Caleb as unphotogenic, now bragged to anyone who would listen about her grandson's modeling career. "He's booked solid through the holidays," she announced proudly, as if she'd always known he was destined for success. The irony wasn't lost on me. The same people who had made me feel like Caleb's appearance was something to manage had now embraced him as a source of family pride. His success had given them permission to see his beauty, to celebrate the very features they'd once viewed with sympathy or concern. As I stood in my parents' backyard watching my relatives fuss over the baby they'd once pitied, I realized how profoundly my understanding of beauty and worth had evolved. For the first months of Caleb's life, I'd measured his value through other people's reactions, letting their discomfort become my shame. But now I understood that their initial responses said nothing about my son and everything about their own limited perspectives. Patricia had been right that day at the cafe. Caleb didn't just have a beautiful face, he had a memorable one. But more than that, he had taught me that beauty isn't about meeting someone else's standards or fitting into pre-existing categories. Real beauty lies in authenticity, in the courage to exist fully as yourself without apology or explanation. The modeling career was wonderful, and the validation from industry professionals had been transformative. But the real victory was internal, the moment I stopped seeing my son through other people's eyes and started trusting my own vision of who he was. The moment I realized that the love I felt when I looked at him was more reliable than any external opinion about his worth. Looking back now, I can see how close I came to robbing Caleb of his natural confidence, how my own internalized shame could have taught him to hide the very thing that made him special. If I'd continued down that path, if I'd prioritized other people's comfort over his authentic self-expression, I might have raised a child who spent his life apologizing for taking up space. Instead, Caleb is growing up knowing that his differences are celebrated, that his unique appearance is an asset rather than a liability. He's too young to understand the modeling industry or the concept of beauty standards, but he's already learning that he belongs in any room he enters, that cameras seek him out rather than avoid him, that his face is exactly the right face for the world to see. And perhaps most importantly, I'm learning alongside him. Every photo shoot, every positive response, every moment when strangers stop to admire him on the street is teaching me to trust my own instincts about beauty and worth. I'm unlearning years of conditioning that taught me to defer to other people's aesthetic judgments, especially Victoria's, and I'm discovering that my love for my child is a more reliable guide than anyone else's opinion. The woman who once researched laser removal procedures for her infant son now watches that same child work confidently in front of professional photographers, his birthmark highlighted and celebrated rather than hidden. The transformation isn't just in how the world sees Caleb, it's in how I've learned to see myself as his mother, as the person entrusted with protecting his self-worth and nurturing his natural confidence. Victoria still doesn't fully understand what happened, how she could have been so wrong in her initial assessment. But she's learned to trust professional judgment over her own gut reactions, and she's genuinely proud of Caleb's success. Our relationship has evolved too. I no longer automatically defer to her opinions about appearance or acceptability, and she's had to reckon with the limitations of her own perspective. The journey from that hospital room, where I first noticed Caleb's birthmark with anxiety, to the modeling studio, where that same birthmark is professionally celebrated, feels like a lifetime of growth, compressed into just a few months. But maybe that's what parenthood is, a series of moments that challenge everything you thought you knew about love, beauty, worth, and belonging. Now, when I look at Caleb, I see what Patricia saw that day at Blue Moon Café, not a baby with a flaw that needed managing, but a child with a distinctive beauty that deserved celebrating. His face tells a story that connects with people, makes them stop and look, reminds them that perfection isn't about uniformity, but about the courage to be authentically yourself. And every time someone compliments his photographs, every time a brand specifically requests him for a campaign, every time another parent thanks me for putting a face like his in the world, I'm reminded that the voice that told me he wasn't beautiful enough was never worth listening to in the first place. The morning after meeting Patricia Wolfe, I woke up with a strange sensation in my chest, like something had unlocked overnight. Caleb was stirring in his crib, making those soft morning sounds that usually sent me rushing to him with practiced efficiency. But this time, I lingered in bed for a moment, replaying Patricia's words in my mind. The most captivating face I've seen in 20 years. Not polite, not diplomatic, captivating. Daniel was already in the shower, and I could hear the familiar sounds of our morning routine beginning. But nothing felt familiar today. Everything looked different, through the lens of what had happened at Blue Moon Café. The nursery that I'd decorated with such careful attention to creating a peaceful, beautiful space for my son suddenly seemed like a sanctuary for someone truly special. Not just a room where I hid a baby I was ashamed to show the world. I picked up Caleb and carried him to the changing table, but instead of positioning him to minimize the appearance of his birthmark, I found myself studying it in the morning light streaming through the window. The deep red coloring that had once made me flinch now looked rich and complex, like a watercolor painting that shifted and changed depending on the angle. Patricia was right. It did catch the light beautifully. After Daniel left for work at the architectural firm downtown, I found myself doing something I hadn't done since Caleb was born. I took out my phone and started taking pictures of him. Not the carefully angled shots I'd been capturing for months, designed to hide or minimize his birthmark, but honest photographs that showed his whole face. In frame after frame, I watched him through the camera lens, seeing what Patricia must have seen that day at the cafe. His eyes were remarkable, deep brown with flecks of gold that sparkled when he was alert and curious. His smile, when it came, was crooked and genuine, the kind of expression that made you want to smile back instinctively. And the birthmark, instead of dominating his face like I'd always imagined, actually balanced his features in an unexpectedly harmonious way. It was like nature had painted him with an artist's eye for composition. I spent the morning researching Pacific Northwest Talent Agency online, something I probably should have done before Patricia even left the cafe. But what I found reinforced everything she'd told me. Their website showcased dozens of children who would never have made it into traditional modeling portfolios even 5 years ago. Kids with freckles, gap teeth, hearing aids, birthmarks, different ethnicities, and body types that represented how children actually looked, rather than some impossible standard of perfection. There was a whole section dedicated to their philosophy of, quote, authentic representation, explaining how brands were increasingly recognizing that diverse advertising performed better, connected more deeply with consumers, and reflected the real world that their products served. They had testimonials from parents whose children had successful modeling careers despite, or perhaps because of, their distinctive features. One testimonial stood out to me. A mother from Seattle had written about her daughter's vitiligo, a condition that caused patches of her skin to lose pigmentation. She described years of trying to hide her daughter's appearance, researching treatments, and feeling ashamed of her child's natural coloring. Then a talent scout had approached them at a farmer's market, leading to a modeling career that had completely transformed not just their daughter's self-image, but the entire family's understanding of beauty and worth. Reading her story felt like looking into a mirror. The shame, the research into medical corrections, the careful positioning to hide distinctive features. I'd lived every moment she described. But her story had a different ending, one where her daughter's differences became her greatest professional asset. I called the number on Patricia's business card before I could lose my nerve. Her assistant, a cheerful woman named Jennifer, scheduled us for a consultation the following Thursday. "Patricia mentioned meeting you and your son," Jennifer said warmly. "She's very excited about the possibility of working with you. She doesn't usually approach families unsolicited unless she sees something really special." The validation felt both thrilling and terrifying. For months, I'd been operating under the assumption that my son's appearance was something to manage and minimize. Now I was being told it was something to celebrate and showcase. The mental adjustment required was enormous, like trying to see the world through a completely different set of eyes. That afternoon, Rachel Kim stopped by with coffee and pastries from our favorite bakery on Division Street. Rachel had been my closest friend since college, and she was one of the few people who had never seemed to notice Caleb's birthmark as anything other than part of who he was. When other people made those careful, diplomatic comments about his sweet personality, Rachel would simply coo over how handsome he was, how alert and engaging his expressions were. "You look different today," she observed, settling onto my couch with her latte. "More relaxed or something. What's going on?" I told her about Patricia, about the modeling agency, about the complete upheaval of everything I'd believed about Caleb's appearance. Rachel listened without interruption, but I could see her expression shifting from surprise to something that looked like relief. "Lauren," she said finally, "I've been waiting for someone else to see what I see when I look at Caleb. He's absolutely gorgeous. That birthmark doesn't make him less beautiful. It makes him more interesting, more memorable. I've never understood why you seem so concerned about it." Her words hit me like a revelation. Rachel had been seeing my son clearly all along, while I'd been viewing him through the distorted lens of other people's narrow beauty standards. She'd never needed professional validation to recognize what was obvious to anyone looking without prejudice. "But Victoria said," I began. "Victoria has spent so much time curating her online image that she's forgotten what real beauty looks like," Rachel interrupted gently. "Her whole world revolves around filters and perfect lighting, and meeting some impossible standard that doesn't actually exist in nature. Of course she couldn't see Caleb's natural beauty. She's trained herself to only recognize artificial perfection." The insight was stunning in its simplicity. Victoria's inability to see Caleb's attractiveness wasn't a reflection of his appearance. It was a reflection of her own limited perspective, warped by years of living in a world where everything had to be edited and perfected before it was worthy of display. We spent the afternoon looking through the photos I'd taken that morning, and Rachel's reactions were everything I'd hoped to see in other people's faces for months. She gasped over his expressions, commented on how photogenic he was, and repeatedly mentioned how striking and unique he looked. This was what genuine appreciation looked like, not the careful politeness I'd been interpreting as rejection. "When is the consultation?" Rachel asked as she was getting ready to leave. "Thursday afternoon. I'm nervous about it." "Don't be. This Patricia woman knows what she's talking about. And even if nothing comes of it professionally, at least you'll have some beautiful photos of Caleb to treasure." After Rachel left, I found myself calling my mother. I hadn't planned to tell anyone in my family about the modeling opportunity until I knew more about what it might involve, but I was feeling confident and excited in a way I hadn't experienced since Caleb was born. "A modeling agency wants to represent Caleb?" Mom's voice was incredulous. "Are you sure it's legitimate? There are so many scams targeting new parents these days." I explained that I'd researched the agency thoroughly, that they were well-established and professional, that the consultation was free and no obligation. But I could hear the skepticism in her voice, the same doubt that Victoria had expressed when I'd told her about the opportunity. "I just don't want you to get your hopes up, honey," Mom said gently. "The modeling industry is very competitive, and they have very specific requirements. Maybe this woman was just being nice." There it was again. The assumption that professional interest in my son must be charity or politeness rather than genuine recognition of his marketable qualities. Even my own mother couldn't imagine that Caleb might actually be considered attractive by industry standards. But this time, instead of letting their doubt become my own, I found myself pushing back. "Mom, this woman makes her living identifying children who can be successful models. She has nothing to gain by lying to me about Caleb's potential." If she didn't think he could book jobs, she wouldn't want to work with us. The conversation ended on a strained note, with Mom promising to support whatever decision I made while clearly hoping I wouldn't pursue something that might lead to disappointment. After we hung up, I realized that my family's reaction to Caleb's appearance had been so consistently negative that they literally couldn't imagine a scenario where his distinctive features would be considered an asset. That evening, while Daniel helped me research the modeling industry and what to expect from our consultation, I found myself thinking about all the moments over the past few months when I'd hidden Caleb's face from the world. The careful positioning in his stroller, the strategic angles in photographs, the way I'd unconsciously turned him away from strangers who wanted to admire him. I'd been robbing him of the opportunity to be seen and appreciated as he truly was. I feel like I owe him an apology, I told Daniel as we looked through the agency's portfolio online. I've spent so much time being ashamed of how he looks when I should have been celebrating it. Daniel pulled me closer on the couch. You were protecting him the only way you knew how. But now you know better, and you can do better. That's all any parent can do. The days leading up to our consultation passed in a blur of research and preparation. I read everything I could find about pediatric modeling, about what to expect from talent agencies, about how to protect children in the entertainment industry. I wanted to be informed and prepared, not just hopeful and naive. I also spent time really looking at Caleb, studying his face and expressions without the filter of shame or anxiety that had colored my perception for months. What I saw was a baby with remarkable presence, someone who drew attention not despite his distinctive features but because of them. His birthmark wasn't a flaw that needed hiding. It was the thing that made him unforgettable. On Thursday morning, I dressed Caleb in a simple white onesie and dark jeans, outfit that Patricia had suggested would photograph well and wouldn't distract from his natural features. As I strapped him into his car seat for the drive to the Pearl District, I felt a mixture of nervousness and anticipation that reminded me of the moments before major life events: graduation, job interviews, my wedding day. The Pacific Northwest Talent Agency occupied a beautiful space in a converted warehouse, with high ceilings, exposed brick walls, and enormous windows that flooded the reception area with natural light. The walls were covered with headshots and portfolio images, and I was struck immediately by the diversity of faces looking back at me. Children of every ethnicity, kids with glasses and braces, toddlers with distinctive features that would have been considered imperfections in traditional modeling but were clearly celebrated here. Patricia greeted us personally, and her reaction to seeing Caleb again was immediate and unguarded. He's even more photogenic than I remembered, she said, reaching for him with the easy confidence of someone who'd worked with thousands of children. Tony is gonna love working with this face. Tony Marcelli, the photographer Patricia had mentioned, joined us in her office a few minutes later. He was younger than I'd expected, probably in his early 30s, with an easy smile and an impressive portfolio of commercial work. His specialty was lifestyle photography that captured children in natural, unposed moments, exactly the kind of authentic imagery that brands were increasingly seeking. "Oh, wow," Tony said when he saw Caleb. "Look at those eyes. And that birthmark. It's like nature's own highlighting." This is going to be so much fun to photograph. His enthusiasm was infectious and completely genuine. There was nothing diplomatic or careful about his reaction, no hedging or qualification. He saw Caleb and immediately started visualizing how to capture his best features, talking about lighting and angles, and the kind of authentic moments that made for compelling commercial imagery. "Most babies this age are hit or miss for photography," Tony explained as Patricia walked us through their process. "They're sleepy or fussy or just not engaged with the camera. But some kids have this natural presence, this quality that draws your eye and holds your attention. You can't teach it or fake it. Either a child has it or they don't. And your son definitely has it." The consultation lasted over an hour. Patricia explained how the agency worked, what kind of opportunities might be available for Caleb, and what the process would look like if we decided to move forward. They had several clients actively seeking diverse models for upcoming campaigns, including a major children's clothing brand that was launching a spring collection focused on authentic representation. "I want to be completely transparent with you," Patricia said as we wrapped up our meeting. "This industry can be unpredictable, and there are never any guarantees. But based on what I see today, and given the current market demand for authentic diversity, I think Caleb has excellent potential for regular bookings. She showed us examples of other children they represented who had achieved significant success despite, or because of, distinctive features. A little girl with a cleft palate who'd become the face of a national toy campaign. Twin boys with Down syndrome who regularly booked commercial work. A toddler with alopecia who'd been featured in major magazine spreads. The industry has changed dramatically in the past 5 years, Patricia explained. Brands realize that authentic representation isn't just socially responsible, it's good business. Children and parents connect more deeply with advertising that reflects how families actually look, not some impossible standard of perfection. By the time we left the agency, I felt like I was living in a completely different reality than the one I'd inhabited that morning. The baby I'd been hiding from the world was being courted by professionals who saw his distinctive appearance as exactly what the market wanted. The birthmark I'd considered having medically removed was being described as a natural asset that would make him memorable and marketable. Driving home through Portland traffic, I kept glancing at Caleb in his car seat, trying to reconcile this new information with everything I'd believed about his appearance for the past 3 months. How had I gotten it so wrong? How had I let other people's limited perspectives become my own truth about my son's worth and beauty? That evening, while Daniel and I discussed what we'd learned at the consultation, I found myself thinking about all the parents I'd read about online, whose children had been discovered by talent scouts. None of their stories had started with conventional beauty or obvious marketability. They'd all involved children who looked different, who stood out from the crowd, who had something distinctive that made them impossible to forget. I keep thinking about what Victoria said, I admitted to Daniel as we sat on our back porch, watching the sunset over the neighborhood. That some babies just aren't naturally photogenic. She was so confident about it, so sure that she knew what she was talking about. Daniel was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. Victoria has spent her entire adult life in a world where everything is filtered and edited and perfected before it's shared with anyone else. She's forgotten what natural beauty looks like. She's trained herself to only see flaws that need fixing instead of features that make someone special. His insight echoed what Rachel had said, but hearing it from Daniel made it feel more significant somehow. The man who'd fallen in love with Caleb's face from the moment he was born, who'd never seen the birthmark as anything other than part of what made our son perfect, understood what I was just beginning to grasp. Beauty wasn't about meeting someone else's standards. It was about being authentically, unapologetically yourself. The decision to sign with Patricia's agency felt both momentous and inevitable. Everything about our consultation had felt right, from Tony's immediate enthusiasm to Patricia's genuine excitement about Caleb's potential. But more than that, it felt like the natural next step in a journey I'd started the moment I decided to trust what I saw in my son's face instead of what other people told me I should see. We scheduled a test shoot for the following week, and Patricia connected us with several potential bookings that would be perfect for Caleb's look and age. Within days, what had started as a chance encounter at a coffee shop had transformed into the beginning of what could be a significant modeling career. But the real transformation wasn't professional, it was personal. I was learning to see my son through different eyes, to trust my own instincts about his beauty and worth instead of deferring to other people's judgments. The mother who had spent months researching medical procedures to change her baby's appearance was now preparing to put that same face in front of professional cameras, trusting that his distinctive features were exactly what the world needed to see. The night before Caleb's first test shoot, I stood in his nursery watching him sleep, his face peaceful and perfect in the soft glow of his nightlight. The birthmark that had once filled me with anxiety now looked like art, like something that had been painted by an artist who understood that true beauty came from uniqueness rather than uniformity. Patricia had been right that day at Blue Moon Café. Caleb didn't just have a beautiful face, he had a captivating one. And I was finally ready to let the world see what I should have recognized from the very beginning. That my son was exactly perfect the way he was, birthmark and all. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities, the beginning of a journey I never could have imagined when Caleb was born. But tonight I was simply a mother who had learned to see her child clearly, who had stopped apologizing for his appearance and started celebrating it. The transformation from shame to pride hadn't happened overnight, but it had happened completely. And as I kissed Caleb's forehead and whispered goodnight, I realized that this journey wasn't just about modeling or professional validation. It was about learning to trust love over fear, authenticity over conformity, and my own heart over other people's opinions. Those were lessons that would serve us both long after any modeling career had ended. Lessons about worth and beauty and belonging that would shape how Caleb saw himself for the rest of his life. The morning of Caleb's first test shoot arrived with crisp October air and golden light filtering through our bedroom windows. I'd barely slept, not from anxiety but from excitement that felt like electricity running through my veins. After months of hiding my son from cameras, I was about to voluntarily place him in front of professional photographers, who specifically wanted to capture the very features I'd been taught to minimize. I dressed carefully in dark jeans and a simple cream sweater, nothing that would draw attention away from Caleb during the shoot. For him, I'd chosen the outfits Patricia recommended, a soft gray romper and tiny dark jeans that would photograph beautifully without competing with his natural coloring. As I changed his diaper and got him ready, I found myself studying his face with fresh eyes, seeing the artistic composition that Tony had immediately recognized. The drive to the studio in southeast Portland felt surreal. 3 months ago, I'd been researching ways to medically alter Caleb's appearance. Now I was driving to a professional photo shoot where that same appearance was the entire reason we'd been invited. The mental adjustment still felt enormous, like trying to reverse a lifetime of conditioning in a matter of weeks. Tony's studio occupied the ground floor of a converted warehouse, with soaring ceilings and walls of windows that could be adjusted for different lighting effects. When we arrived, he was already setting up equipment, arranging reflectors, and testing different backgrounds. His enthusiasm when he saw Caleb was immediate and genuine. "Perfect timing," he said, reaching for his camera. "The light is absolutely gorgeous right now, and he looks so alert. Let's see what magic we can create." What followed was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. Tony worked with the patience and creativity of someone who truly understood his craft, capturing Caleb in dozens of different poses and expressions. But these weren't the stiff, formal portraits I'd associated with professional photography. Instead, Tony focused on authentic moments. Caleb's natural curiosity, his crooked smile, the way his eyes tracked movement around the room. "The birthmark is catching the light perfectly," Tony murmured as he adjusted his angle. "It's like nature created its own highlighting. See how it adds depth and dimension to his face? Most babies this age have very round, uniform features that can look flat in photographs. But Caleb has this natural asymmetry that makes every shot interesting." I watched through the camera's LCD screen as Tony captured image after image, each one more beautiful than the last. In his professional lighting, with his expert eye for composition, Caleb looked like he belonged on magazine covers. The birthmark that had once made me wince now appeared artistic and intentional, like a masterpiece that had been painted by someone who understood how to create visual interest. "He's a natural," Tony said during a brief break while Caleb had a bottle. "Some kids freeze up or get overwhelmed by the lights and equipment. But he's engaging with the camera, responding to my voice, giving me these incredible expressions. It's like he knows he's being photographed and he's enjoying it." The session lasted 2 hours, with breaks for feeding and diaper changes. Throughout it all, Caleb remained calm and cooperative, almost as if he understood the importance of what was happening. Tony captured him sleeping, awake, and alert, interacting with props and in various outfits that showcased different aspects of his personality. "I can't wait to edit these," Tony said as we wrapped up. "I already know which ones are going to be portfolio standouts. Patricia is going to flip when she sees them." Driving home, I felt transformed in a way that had nothing to do with the photos themselves, and everything to do with how I'd felt watching my son work. For 2 hours, Caleb had been celebrated and admired for exactly who he was. No one had suggested hiding his birthmark or positioning him to minimize its appearance. Instead, professional photographers had specifically highlighted it, used it as a focal point, treated it as the asset Patricia had claimed it was. That afternoon, while Caleb napped, I found myself doing something I hadn't done since he was born. I opened my laptop and started creating a photo album of pictures I'd taken myself over the past few weeks. Not the carefully angled shots I'd been capturing for months, but honest photographs that showed his whole face, his expressions, his natural beauty. Looking through them chronologically, I could see my own evolution as clearly as if someone had documented it externally. The early photos showed a mother trying to hide her baby's distinctive features. The recent one showed a woman who had learned to celebrate what made her child unique. The difference wasn't in Caleb. He'd been beautiful all along. The difference was in the eyes behind the camera. Rachel stopped by that evening with Thai takeout and wine, eager to hear about the photo shoot. When I showed her the behind-the-scenes pictures I'd taken on my phone, her reaction was everything I'd hoped to see from other people for months. "Lauren, these are incredible," she said, scrolling through image after image. "He looks so confident, so comfortable, and that birthmark, it's stunning in professional lighting." It really does look like artistic highlighting. We spent the evening talking about beauty standards and representation, about how the modeling industry was changing, and why authentic diversity mattered. Rachel had always been more progressive in her thinking than most of our social circle, but even she was surprised by how dramatically the commercial photography world had shifted towards celebrating differences rather than hiding them. "I keep thinking about all those years we spent trying to look like magazine models," she said as we finished our wine, never realizing that the magazines were starting to look for people who looked like us instead. Her comment stuck with me long after she left. For decades, people had been trying to conform to narrow beauty standards that were largely artificial and unattainable. But now the industry was recognizing that authenticity was more compelling than perfection, that distinctive features were more memorable than generic prettiness. 3 days later, Tony sent the edited photos from Caleb's test shoot. I opened the email on my laptop while Caleb played on his activity mat nearby, and what I saw took my breath away. These weren't just beautiful pictures of my baby. They were works of art that happened to feature my son as the subject. In Tony's skilled hands, every aspect of Caleb's appearance had been transformed from potential flaw to undeniable asset. His birthmark provided visual interest and asymmetry that made each photo compelling. His expressive eyes drew the viewer in immediately. His natural alertness and curiosity translated into images that felt alive and engaging rather than static and posed. I called Daniel at work, unable to contain my excitement. "You have to see these photos," I said. "They're incredible. Caleb looks like he belongs in a magazine." "Send them to me right now," Daniel said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. "I want to see what our supermodel son looks like in professional pictures." Within minutes, my phone was buzzing with Daniel's responses. "These are amazing. He looks so professional. That birthmark is absolutely beautiful in this lighting. Patricia was right. He's going to be incredibly successful at this." But it was his final text that made me tear up. "I'm so proud of you for seeing what I've seen all along. Our son is perfect, exactly the way he is." That afternoon, Patricia called with news that made my heart race. "Lauren, I just saw Tony's photos, and they're absolutely stunning. I've already sent them to 3 different clients, and the response has been immediate. We have 2 confirmed bookings for next week, and a 3rd client wants to meet Caleb in person before making a decision." The first booking was for a local children's boutique that specialized in organic cotton clothing. They were launching a new fall line and wanted authentic, diverse models for their catalog and website. The second was a regional toy company that was shooting their holiday campaign and specifically requested children with distinctive features who would stand out in their advertising. Both clients saw Caleb's photos and immediately said yes, Patricia explained. "That's incredibly rare, especially for a new model. Usually there's a longer consideration process, multiple rounds of approval. But something about his look is just clicking with everyone who sees it." The validation felt surreal. For months, I'd been operating under the assumption that Caleb's appearance would limit his opportunities in life. Now I was learning that his distinctive features were opening doors that would have remained closed to more conventionally pretty children. I called my mother to share the news, hoping that professional validation might help her understand what Patricia and Tony had seen immediately. But her response was cautious and worried, rather than excited and supportive. "Just be careful, honey," she said after I explained about the bookings. "The entertainment industry can be very exploitative, especially with children. Make sure you're not getting in over your head." I explained that Patricia's agency was well established and reputable, that they had strict policies about working conditions and compensation, that the shoots would be brief and age-appropriate. But I could hear the skepticism in Mom's voice, the underlying assumption that this opportunity was too good to be true. "Have you told Victoria?" she asked. "She might have some good advice about the modeling world." The suggestion stung more than I cared to admit. After months of Victoria's dismissive comments about Caleb's appearance, the idea of asking for her advice about his modeling career felt almost insulting. But I realized that my mother still viewed Victoria as the family expert on all things related to beauty and image, even when her expertise had proven completely wrong. That evening, I made a decision that felt both necessary and terrifying. I called Victoria and told her about the photo shoot, the agency, and the upcoming bookings. Her initial response was silence so long that I wondered if the call had dropped. "A modeling agency wants to represent Caleb?" she finally said, her voice carefully neutral. "Two agencies, actually. But we're going with Pacific Northwest talent because Patricia specializes in authentic representation. She thinks Caleb's birthmark will be a huge asset in the current market." Another pause. "Are you sure this is legitimate? There are so many scams targeting new parents, especially ones who might be vulnerable to flattery about their children." The implication was clear, that I was being taken advantage of because I was desperate for validation about my son's appearance. Victoria couldn't quite bring herself to say that Caleb wasn't attractive enough for legitimate modeling work, but her skepticism conveyed the same message. "I've researched everything thoroughly," I said, keeping my voice steady. "The agency is well established, the photographer is experienced, and we already have confirmed bookings with paying clients. This isn't a scam or charity. It's a business opportunity based on Caleb's marketable appearance." "Well," Victoria said after another pause, "I hope it works out. Just remember that the modeling industry can be very fickle. Don't get too attached to the idea of this being a long-term career." After we hung up, I sat in my kitchen feeling a mixture of sadness and clarity. Victoria still couldn't see what multiple industry professionals had recognized immediately. Her worldview was so shaped by narrow beauty standards that she literally couldn't imagine a scenario where Caleb's distinctive features would be considered an asset rather than a liability. But her inability to recognize his potential was no longer my problem. I'd spent months letting her opinion become my truth about my son's worth and beauty. Now I had objective, professional validation that completely contradicted everything she'd told me. The choice was mine: continue deferring to her judgment, or trust what I was seeing with my own eyes. The week leading up to Caleb's first professional booking was a whirlwind of preparation and anticipation. Patricia walked me through what to expect, from the shooting schedule to the wardrobe requirements to the payment structure. Everything was professional and straightforward, nothing like the exploitative industry my mother had warned me about. The boutique shoot was scheduled for a Thursday morning at a studio in the Pearl District. When we arrived, I was struck by how many other families were there, diverse parents with children of all ages, ethnicities, and appearances. This wasn't the homogeneous modeling world I'd imagined based on magazine spreads from my childhood. This was a celebration of how children actually looked in the real world. The photographer, a woman named Sarah Chen, had the same immediate positive reaction to Caleb that I'd come to expect from industry professionals. "Oh, he's gorgeous," she said, reaching for her camera. "That birthmark is going to photograph beautifully against these earth tones. Let's create some magic." What followed was a professional photo shoot that felt more like playtime than work. Sarah specialized in capturing authentic interactions between children and clothing, creating lifestyle images that showed kids being kids rather than posing like miniature adults. Caleb was a natural, engaging with props and responding to Sarah's voice with the same comfort he'd shown during Tony's test shoot. "He's incredibly photogenic," Sarah told me during a break. "Some babies freeze up under studio lights, but he's actually more animated than usual. It's like the camera brings out his personality." The shoot lasted 3 hours, with multiple outfit changes and different setups that showcased the boutique's fall collection. Throughout it all, Caleb remained cooperative and engaged, earning praise from Sarah and her assistants for his professionalism and natural camera presence. But the most meaningful moment came when Sarah was reviewing images on her camera's LCD screen. "Look at this shot," she said, showing me a picture of Caleb in a cream-colored sweater, his birthmark beautifully highlighted by side lighting that created depth and dimension across his face. "This is going to be the cover image for their catalog. It's absolutely perfect." I stared at the photograph, seeing my son transformed into something that looked like fine art. The birthmark that had once made me research medical removal procedures was now the focal point of a professional image that would be distributed to thousands of potential customers. The reversal was so complete that it felt like I was living in an alternate universe. The payment for the shoot was deposited into our account the following day, along with a contract for the boutique's holiday campaign. Sarah had been so pleased with Caleb's work that the client wanted to book him for their next seasonal collection as well. "This is incredibly unusual," Patricia explained when she called to tell me about the additional booking. "Most new models work sporadically for months before they start getting repeat clients. But Caleb's look is resonating so strongly that companies want to build campaigns around him." Within 2 weeks, word about Caleb's distinctive appearance and professional demeanor had spread through Portland's commercial photography community. Patricia's phone was ringing daily with requests for his participation in various projects. A children's hospital wanted him for their diversity and inclusion campaign. A national toy company was interested in featuring him in their holiday advertising. A magazine was planning a spread about children with birthmarks and wanted him as the cover model. Each opportunity represented more than just professional validation. It was evidence that the world was ready to celebrate children who looked different, that authenticity was becoming more valuable than conventional prettiness. Caleb wasn't succeeding despite his birthmark. He was succeeding because of it. The transformation in how I saw my son was complete, but the transformation in how our family saw him was just beginning. When I shared photos from his professional shoots on social media, the response was overwhelmingly positive. Friends and acquaintances who had made those careful diplomatic comments about his sweet personality were now commenting about how beautiful and photogenic he was, how proud they were to know a quote-unquote baby model. But it was my mother's reaction that surprised me most. When she saw the catalog images featuring Caleb, her entire demeanor changed. The worry and skepticism were replaced by genuine pride and amazement. "I had no idea," she said when she called after seeing the photos. "He looks absolutely stunning. That birthmark is beautiful in professional lighting. I'm sorry I doubted this could work out." Her apology felt significant, but what mattered more was the shift in her perspective. Like Victoria, she'd been unable to see Caleb's potential until it was validated by external success. But unlike Victoria, she was willing to admit when she'd been wrong and adjust her viewpoint accordingly. The real test came when the boutique's fall catalog was released and featured Caleb on the cover. The image Sarah had called absolutely perfect was now displayed in storefront windows across Portland, mailed to thousands of customers, and shared widely on social media. My son's face, birthmark prominently featured, was suddenly visible throughout the city. The response was immediate and overwhelmingly positive. The boutique reported that the catalog had generated more engagement than any previous seasonal campaign. Parents were sharing the cover image online, praising the company for featuring a child who looked real, rather than artificially perfect. Local news outlets picked up the story, interviewing the boutique owners about their decision to embrace authentic representation in their marketing. But the comment that moved me most came from a stranger who approached me at a coffee shop after recognizing Caleb from the catalog cover. "Thank you," she said simply. "My daughter has a birthmark too, and seeing your son in that beautiful photograph gives me hope that she'll grow up in a world that celebrates her differences instead of asking her to hide them." Standing there in that cafe, holding my son while a stranger thanked me for simply allowing him to be seen as he truly was, I realized how far we'd all come. 3 months earlier, I'd been researching ways to erase the very feature that was now bringing hope to other parents and children. I'd been so consumed with meeting other people's narrow definition of acceptable appearance that I'd almost robbed my son of the chance to show the world that beauty came in many forms. The modeling career was wonderful, and the professional validation had been transformative. But the real victory was internal. The moment I stopped seeing Caleb through other people's eyes and started trusting my own vision of who he was. The moment I realized that my love for him was more reliable than anyone else's opinion about his worth. As I prepared for his next photo shoot, I thought about all the children who might see his images and feel represented for the first time. All the parents who might realize that their children's differences were gifts rather than problems to be solved. All the ways that authentic representation in media could change how society defined beauty and worth. Caleb was changing more than just our family's understanding of attractiveness. He was contributing to a larger cultural shift toward celebrating diversity rather than demanding conformity. And he was doing it simply by being himself, by allowing his natural beauty to be captured and shared with the world. The woman who had once hidden her baby's birthmark from strangers was now watching that same feature make him one of the most sought-after child models in Portland. The transformation wasn't just in Caleb's career prospects, it was in my understanding of what it meant to be beautiful, valuable, and worthy of celebration exactly as you are. The call came on a Tuesday morning while I was feeding Caleb breakfast in his high chair. Patricia's voice carried an excitement I'd never heard before, the kind of barely contained energy that meant something big was about to happen. "Lauren, you need to sit down for this," she said. "I just got off the phone with creative directors at Sunshine Kids Clothing. They're launching a national campaign called Every Child Shines, and they want Caleb as their lead model." I nearly dropped my phone. Sunshine Kids was one of the biggest children's clothing brands in the country, with stores in every major mall and a marketing budget that put their advertisements on primetime television. This wasn't a local boutique or regional campaign. This was the kind of opportunity that could change everything. "They saw his catalog cover and the hospital campaign photos," Patricia continued, speaking rapidly with enthusiasm. "The creative team had an immediate response. They said his face tells exactly the story they want to convey, that every child is beautiful and deserving of celebration. They're offering a 6-month exclusive contract with options for renewal." The numbers she quoted made my head spin. Not just the compensation, which was more money than Daniel and I made in several months combined, but the scope of the campaign. National television commercials, print advertisements in major magazines, billboard displays in major cities, and a comprehensive digital marketing strategy that would reach millions of families across the country. "There's one catch," Patricia said, and I braced myself for the complication that would make this opportunity too good to be true. "They want to meet with you and Caleb in person before making the final decision. The executives are flying in from their headquarters in Los Angeles next week specifically for this meeting." After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen staring at Caleb, who was happily smearing avocado across his tray and babbling to himself. 6 months ago, I'd been hiding his face from strangers in coffee shops. Now a major corporation wanted to build a national advertising campaign around that same face, to put his image on billboards and television screens across America. I called Daniel immediately, catching him between meetings at the architectural firm. "Sunshine Kids wants Caleb for a national campaign," I said without preamble. The silence that followed stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. "Say that again," Daniel finally managed. I repeated everything Patricia had told me, watching through our kitchen window as neighbors went about their ordinary Tuesday morning routines, completely unaware that inside our house, our 6-month-old baby was being offered the kind of modeling contract that could set him up financially for life. "This is incredible," Daniel said, and I could hear him moving, probably finding somewhere private to continue the conversation. "I'm so proud of you, Lauren. You saw his potential when everyone else was telling you he wasn't photogenic enough for family pictures." The irony wasn't lost on either of us. Victoria's assessment that Caleb lacked natural camera appeal was about to be contradicted by one of the largest children's brands in America. The baby she'd deemed unsuitable for unedited family photos was being courted for a campaign that would reach more people than any family reunion ever could. That afternoon, I called my mother to share the news. Her reaction was immediate shock, followed by a stream of concerns that revealed how much she still didn't understand about what was happening. "A national campaign?" she repeated. "Are you sure this is safe?" Won't this much exposure be overwhelming for such a young baby? I explained that Caleb had been thriving during his local shoots, that he seemed to enjoy the attention and stimulation of working with photographers, that Patricia's agency had strict guidelines about working conditions for infant models. But I could hear the worry in Mom's voice, the underlying fear that we were getting involved in something beyond our understanding. "Have you talked to Victoria about this?" she asked. She might have some insights about dealing with major brands and contracts. The suggestion felt like a test I wasn't sure I wanted to take. Victoria had been notably quiet since Caleb's local success had begun, offering only lukewarm congratulations when I'd shared news of his bookings. I suspected she was struggling to reconcile her initial assessment of his appearance with the professional validation he was receiving, but as much as I dreaded her potential reaction, I realized that I needed to tell Victoria about the Sunshine Kids opportunity before she heard about it from our mother or saw it announced online. This news was too significant to let her discover secondhand. I called her that evening, after Caleb was asleep, and I had time to mentally prepare for whatever response she might have. Victoria's phone rang several times before she answered, and I could hear the sounds of a restaurant or bar in the background. "Lauren, is everything okay?" she asked, clearly surprised by the unexpected call. "I wanted you to hear this from me first," I said. "Caleb has been offered a national modeling contract with Sunshine Kids Clothing." The background noise on her end seemed to fade, as if she'd moved somewhere quieter. "A national contract? With Sunshine Kids?" I explained the details as Patricia had shared them with me. The scope of the campaign, the exclusivity agreement, the potential for renewal, the meeting with executives from Los Angeles. As I spoke, Victoria's silence stretched longer and longer, until I wondered if she was still listening. "Victoria, are you there?" "I'm here," she said finally, her voice careful and controlled. This is really big, Lauren. Sunshine Kids is a major brand. Their campaigns reach millions of people." I waited for her to continue, but she seemed to be struggling with what to say next. When she finally spoke again, her tone was different, quieter, less certain than the confident pronouncements she usually made about appearance and marketability. "I have to ask," she said slowly, "and please don't take this the wrong way, but are you sure they're not planning to edit his appearance? Some brands use distinctive-looking children, but then digitally alter their features for the final advertisements." The question revealed so much about Victoria's worldview that I almost felt sorry for her. Even faced with objective evidence of Caleb's marketability, she couldn't imagine a scenario where his natural appearance would be celebrated rather than corrected. In her mind, his birthmark was still a flaw that would need to be hidden or minimized for mainstream consumption. "Victoria," I said gently, "they specifically want him because of his birthmark, not despite it." The creative director told Patricia that his distinctive features are exactly what they're looking for. They're building the entire campaign around celebrating children who look different. Another long pause. "I see," she said, though her tone suggested she didn't really see at all. "Well, I hope it works out. Just be careful about the contract terms. Sometimes these big companies can be exploitative." After we hung up, I realized that Victoria was never going to fully understand what was happening with Caleb's career. Her entire framework for understanding beauty and marketability was built on the narrow standards that had made her successful as an influencer. She couldn't adapt to a world where authenticity was more valuable than artificial perfection, because her own success depended on maintaining those traditional standards. But her inability to recognize Caleb's potential was no longer relevant to my decision-making process. I'd spent months letting her opinions shape my understanding of my son's worth. Now I had objective evidence from multiple industry professionals that completely contradicted everything she'd told me. The week leading up to the Sunshine Kids meeting passed in a blur of preparation and anticipation. Patricia coached me on what to expect from corporate executives, how to advocate for Caleb's best interests during contract negotiations, and what questions to ask about working conditions and compensation. She also arranged for us to meet with an entertainment lawyer who specialized in child performer contracts, ensuring that we understood every aspect of what we were agreeing to. The executives had reserved a conference room at the downtown Hilton, and when we arrived on Thursday morning, I was struck by how normal they looked. I'd expected intimidating corporate types in expensive suits, but the team from Sunshine Kids looked like the kind of people I might encounter at any Portland coffee shop. Casual but professional, enthusiastic about their work, genuinely excited to meet Caleb. The creative director, a woman named Jennifer Walsh, had the same immediate positive reaction to Caleb that I'd come to expect from industry professionals. "He's even more photogenic in person," she said, reaching for her phone to take pictures. "That birthmark catches the light beautifully. Our photographer is going to have so much fun with this campaign." For the next 2 hours, they outlined their vision for the Every Child Shines campaign. It wasn't just about selling clothes. It was about changing how children's marketing represented diversity and authentic beauty. They showed me storyboards for television commercials, mock-ups for print advertisements, and digital content strategies that would celebrate children who looked different from traditional modeling standards. "We've been working toward this campaign for over a year," explained Mark Rodriguez, the brand's marketing director. "Consumer research shows that parents are desperate for authentic representation in children's advertising. They want to see their own kids reflected in the media, not some impossible standard of perfection." Caleb would be featured alongside other children with distinctive characteristics: a little girl with Down syndrome, twin boys with different skin tones, a toddler who used a hearing aid, and several kids with various physical differences that would have excluded them from traditional campaigns just a few years earlier. "Your son represents something important," Jennifer said as Caleb gurgled happily in my arms. "He shows other children and parents that birthmarks aren't flaws to be hidden. They're features that make someone special and memorable." The contract they offered was comprehensive and generous, with protections for Caleb's working hours, educational requirements, and future opportunities. The compensation was structured to provide both immediate payment and long-term financial security, with bonuses tied to the campaign's performance and options for additional work if the initial launch was successful. But what impressed me most was their genuine understanding of what Caleb's participation meant beyond just business. They weren't exploiting his distinctive appearance for shock value or inspiration porn. They were celebrating it as part of a broader message about inclusion and authentic representation. "We want parents to see this campaign and feel like their children could be in it too," Mark explained. "Not because their kids are perfect according to some narrow standard, but because every child has something special that deserves to be celebrated." After the meeting, Patricia and I sat in the hotel lobby while Caleb napped in his stroller, processing everything we'd just experienced. The offer was more generous than anything she'd seen in her 20 years of representing child models, and the creative vision aligned perfectly with the authentic representation she specialized in promoting. "This is the kind of opportunity that comes along once in a career," she said quietly. "Not just for Caleb, but for what it represents. If this campaign is successful, it could change how the entire industry thinks about child modeling." The decision felt both enormous and inevitable. Everything about the opportunity aligned with what I'd learned about Caleb's potential and what I wanted his career to represent. This wasn't just about professional success. It was about contributing to a cultural shift that could benefit thousands of other children who looked different from traditional beauty standards. I called Daniel from the hotel parking lot, and his response was immediate and enthusiastic. "This sounds incredible," he said after I described the meeting in detail. "They really understand what makes Caleb special, and they want to build a campaign around celebrating that. I think we should do it." That evening, while Caleb played on his activity mat, I found myself thinking about all the moments over the past few months when people had tried to discourage me from pursuing modeling opportunities for him. My mother's warnings about exploitation, Victoria's skepticism about his marketability, even my own initial doubt about whether he was photogenic enough for professional work. Now I was holding a contract offer from one of the biggest children's brands in America, a company that specifically wanted Caleb because of the features other people had told me to hide or minimize. The reversal was so complete that it felt like validation not just of his appearance, but of my decision to trust my own instincts over other people's opinions. The only person whose reaction I was genuinely curious about was Victoria. When I called to tell her that we'd accepted the Sunshine Kids offer, her response was carefully controlled, but revealed the struggle she was having with this new reality. "Congratulations," she said, and I could hear her trying to inject enthusiasm into her voice. "This is obviously a huge opportunity." I hope it goes well. But then she added, almost as an afterthought, I just hope you're prepared for the attention this will bring. National campaigns can be overwhelming, especially for families who aren't used to being in the public eye. The implication was subtle but clear, that we weren't sophisticated enough to handle the level of success Caleb was achieving, that we were naive about the challenges that came with national exposure. Victoria couldn't quite bring herself to celebrate his success, so instead she was expressing concern about our ability to manage it properly. We have excellent representation, I said firmly. Patricia has worked with major brands before, and we have legal counsel reviewing everything. We're going into this with our eyes wide open. After we hung up, I realized that Victoria's response had revealed more about her own insecurities than about any legitimate concern she might have about our situation. Caleb's success was challenging her worldview in ways that made her uncomfortable, forcing her to confront the possibility that her understanding of beauty and marketability had been fundamentally wrong. But her discomfort was no longer my problem to manage. I'd spent too many months letting her opinions shape my understanding of my son's worth. Now I had objective, professional validation from some of the biggest names in children's marketing that completely contradicted everything she'd told me. The first shoot for the Sunshine Kids campaign was scheduled for the following month at a studio in Los Angeles. As I booked our flights and made arrangements for the trip, I felt a mixture of excitement and surreal disbelief. 6 months ago, I'd been hiding Caleb's birthmark from strangers. Now we were flying to California for a photo shoot that would put his face on billboards across the country. The night before we left for Los Angeles, I stood in Caleb's nursery watching him sleep, his face peaceful and perfect in the soft glow of his nightlight. The birthmark that had once filled me with anxiety now looked like something that had been painted by an artist who understood that true beauty came from authenticity, rather than conformity. Tomorrow would mark the beginning of a national campaign that could change not just Caleb's life, but the lives of countless other children who would see themselves represented in mainstream media for the first time. It was a responsibility that felt both thrilling and humbling. But tonight, I was simply a mother who had learned to see her child clearly, who had stopped apologizing for his appearance and started celebrating it. The transformation from shame to pride hadn't happened overnight, but it had happened completely, and it was about to be validated on a scale I never could have imagined. The Los Angeles studio was unlike anything I'd experienced during our Portland shoots. Housed in a converted warehouse in Culver City, it sprawled across multiple sound stages, with professional lighting rigs, elaborate set designs, and a crew of dozens working on different aspects of the campaign. Jennifer Walsh greeted us personally when we arrived, her enthusiasm for the project immediately apparent. We've been looking forward to this shoot for weeks, she said, leading us through the maze of equipment and personnel. The entire creative team is excited to work with Caleb. The photographer for the campaign was David Kim, a renowned commercial artist whose work I'd seen in major magazines without ever knowing his name. His reaction to meeting Caleb was the same immediate appreciation I'd come to expect from industry professionals. Incredible bone structure, he said, studying Caleb's face from different angles. And that birthmark, it's going to be stunning under professional lighting. We're going to create some beautiful images together. What followed was the most elaborate photo shoot I'd ever witnessed. Multiple wardrobe changes, different set designs that recreated everything from playground environments to cozy living rooms, and lighting setups that transformed each scene into something that looked like a lifestyle magazine spread. But what impressed me most was how naturally Caleb adapted to the professional environment. Despite the chaos of crew members moving equipment and the complexity of the setup, he remained calm and engaged, responding to David's direction with the same comfort he'd shown during smaller local shoots. He's incredibly professional for someone his age, David commented during a break between setups. Most babies get overwhelmed by this level of production, but he seems to thrive on the attention and stimulation. The shoot lasted 2 full days, creating enough content for television commercials, print advertisements, digital marketing materials, and in-store displays. Throughout it all, Caleb's birthmark was featured prominently, highlighted by professional lighting that made it look like natural artwork rather than a medical condition. On our final day in Los Angeles, Jennifer and her team showed us rough cuts of the television commercial and preview versions of the print advertisements. Seeing Caleb's face on a large screen, knowing that millions of families would soon see these same images, felt like watching a dream become reality. "These are going to change everything," Jennifer said as we reviewed the materials. "Not just for your son's career, but for how children's advertising represents authenticity and diversity. This campaign is going to make a real difference in how kids see themselves and their own potential." The flight home to Portland felt like traveling between two different worlds. In Los Angeles, Caleb had been treated like a professional model whose distinctive appearance was exactly what major brands wanted to showcase. Back home, we'd returned to a community where some people still viewed his birthmark as something unfortunate that we were learning to live with. But that disconnect no longer bothered me the way it once had. I'd learned to trust objective, professional validation over subjective personal opinions. I'd discovered that my own instincts about my son's beauty and worth were more reliable than anyone else's assessment of his value. The campaign launched 6 weeks later with a coordinated media blitz that exceeded even Sunshine Kids' ambitious expectations. The television commercial aired during primetime family programming. The print advertisements appeared in major parenting magazines, and the digital content generated millions of views and shares across social media platforms. But it was the response from other parents that meant the most to me. Comment sections filled with messages from families who felt represented for the first time, thank you notes from parents of children with birthmarks who finally saw someone like their kids in mainstream advertising, and photos shared by families who felt inspired to celebrate their own children's distinctive features. One comment in particular stopped me in my tracks. A mother had written, "My daughter has the same type of birthmark as this beautiful boy." For years, I've been considering laser removal because I was afraid other kids would tease her. But seeing him celebrated this way has changed my mind completely. Maybe her birthmark isn't something to fix. Maybe it's something that makes her special. Reading those words while holding Caleb in my arms, I realized how close I'd come to making the same mistake. If I'd followed through with removal procedures, if I'd continued hiding his distinctive features from the world, I would have been perpetuating the same narrow beauty standards that had made me ashamed of my perfect baby in the first place. Now his face was inspiring other parents to embrace their children's differences, instead of trying to erase them. The campaign wasn't just successful commercially, it was creating real change in how families understood beauty, worth, and belonging. The transformation was complete, but the impact was just beginning. Caleb had become more than just a successful model. He'd become a symbol of authentic representation and proof that beauty came in many forms. And I'd become more than just his mother. I'd become an advocate for celebrating differences instead of hiding them. The woman who had once researched medical procedures to change her baby's appearance was now watching that same feature inspire millions of families to embrace authenticity over conformity. It was a victory that felt both personal and universal, a reminder that sometimes the things that make us different are exactly the things that make us special. 6 months after the Sunshine Kids campaign launched, I was pushing Caleb's stroller through Pioneer Courthouse Square when a teenage girl approached us with tears in her eyes. She had a port wine birthmark similar to Caleb's, covering part of her cheek and extending down her neck. "Excuse me," she said, her voice shaky with emotion. "Is this the baby from the Sunshine Kids commercials?" When I nodded, she knelt down beside Caleb's stroller and smiled at him through her tears. "Thank you," she whispered. "I've been hiding my birthmark with makeup for 3 years, but seeing him on TV made me realize I don't have to anymore. For the first time in my life, I feel beautiful exactly the way I am." As she walked away, wiping her eyes but standing taller than when she'd approached us, I understood that what had started as a personal journey of acceptance had become something much larger. Caleb's face hadn't just launched a successful modeling career, it had helped change how an entire generation would think about beauty, difference, and self-worth. The success of the Sunshine Kids campaign had exceeded everyone's expectations. The advertisements had generated more positive response than any campaign in the company's history, leading to increased sales, improved brand recognition, and dozens of industry awards for inclusive marketing. More importantly, it had sparked a movement among other major brands to embrace authentic representation in their advertising. Caleb's calendar was now booked solid for the next year, with opportunities that would have been unimaginable when he was born. Major toy companies, children's book publishers, and even a television network producing a show about diverse families had reached out through Patricia's agency. But we'd been selective, choosing only projects that aligned with the message of celebrating differences rather than exploiting them for shock value. The financial security was life-changing, but the cultural impact felt even more significant. Pediatric hospitals reported that parents were increasingly declining cosmetic procedures for their children's birthmarks, citing the positive representation they'd seen in mainstream media. Support groups for families dealing with facial differences shared Caleb's images as examples of how distinctive features could be sources of pride rather than shame. The most meaningful validation came from an unexpected source. Dr. Sarah Martinez, a leading researcher on port wine birthmarks at OHSU, contacted us to discuss Caleb's role in changing public perception about facial differences. She'd been tracking social media conversations and medical consultations since the campaign launched, documenting a measurable shift in how families approach treatment decisions. "Your son has accomplished something remarkable," she told me during our meeting at her office overlooking the Willamette River. "For decades, parents have been bringing their children to me asking how quickly we can remove birthmarks like his. But since his campaign launched, I'm seeing more families who want to wait, who are asking about celebrating their children's differences instead of erasing them." She showed me research data that documented the change. Decreased requests for immediate laser treatment, increased enrollment in support groups focused on acceptance rather than removal, and improved self-esteem scores among children with facial differences who'd seen positive representation in media. "This is more than just a modeling career," Dr. Martinez explained. "Your decision to showcase Caleb's natural appearance is helping to rewrite how society defines normal and beautiful. That's going to impact thousands of children for generations to come." Driving home from that meeting, I thought about how dramatically my own understanding had evolved. The mother, who had once sat in her car researching removal procedures, was now being thanked by medical professionals for helping families embrace their children's natural appearance. The transformation felt both personal and universal, a reminder that changing one family's perspective could ripple outward to influence countless others. But perhaps the most surprising development was how the success had affected my relationship with Victoria. For months after Caleb's career took off, she'd maintained a careful distance, offering polite congratulations, while clearly struggling to reconcile his success with her initial assessment of his appearance. I'd expected her to eventually acknowledge that she'd been wrong, but what actually happened was more complex and revealing. The conversation that changed everything between us happened at our cousin Sarah's baby shower in December. Victoria was there with her perfectly curated Instagram aesthetic, taking photos of the decorations and carefully posed shots of herself with the gift table. But when she saw Caleb, now 10 months old and even more photogenic than he'd been as a newborn, her demeanor shifted noticeably. "He really is beautiful," she said quietly, watching him charm the other guests with his bright smile and animated expressions. "I keep seeing his face everywhere. Billboards, magazines, commercials. It's surreal that this is the same baby I thought wasn't photogenic." I waited, sensing that she had more to say. "I've been thinking a lot about what I said when he was born," Victoria continued, her voice uncharacteristically uncertain. "About some babies not being naturally photogenic. About his birthmark being, well, about it being something that would limit his opportunities." She paused, watching Caleb interact with our cousin's toddler, both children completely comfortable with each other's differences. "I was so wrong," she said finally. "Not just about his potential for modeling, but about what makes someone beautiful. I've been living in this world where everything has to be filtered and perfected and edited before it's worthy of being seen. I forgot that real beauty, the kind that actually connects with people, comes from authenticity." Her admission felt more significant than any apology could have been. Victoria wasn't just acknowledging that she'd misjudged Caleb's marketability. She was recognizing that her entire framework for understanding attractiveness had been fundamentally flawed. "Watching his success has made me realize how much I've lost by only valuing artificial perfection," she continued. "All those years of filters and editing and trying to meet impossible standards, I don't even know what I actually look like anymore without digital enhancement." The conversation marked a turning point in our relationship, but more importantly, it represented a broader shift that was happening across social media and marketing. Victoria's struggles with authentic self-representation weren't unique. Millions of people were questioning beauty standards that demanded digital perfection over natural diversity. The impact extended beyond just changing minds about birthmarks or facial differences. Caleb's campaign had contributed to a larger cultural conversation about inclusion, authenticity, and the damage caused by narrow beauty standards. Brands across multiple industries were scrambling to embrace diverse representation, recognizing that consumers were hungry for marketing that reflected how people actually looked, rather than how they thought they should look. But the most profound transformation was happening within families themselves. Patricia's agency was receiving dozens of inquiries from parents who wanted their children with various differences to be considered for modeling opportunities. Not because they were seeking fame or fortune, but because they wanted their kids to see themselves represented positively in mainstream media. The waiting room at Pacific Northwest Talent had become a celebration of diversity that would have been unthinkable just a year earlier. Children with hearing aids, limb differences, Down syndrome, vitiligo, and dozens of other conditions that had once excluded them from commercial work were now being actively recruited by brands that understood the power of authentic representation. Caleb opened a door that can never be closed again, Patricia explained during one of our regular check-ins. The industry has realized that authentic diversity isn't just socially responsible, it's profitable. Families connect more deeply with brands that reflect their reality, and that's driving real change in how children's marketing works. The financial benefits of Caleb's career had allowed Daniel and me to establish a college fund that would ensure his education regardless of how long his modeling opportunities lasted. But we'd also started a foundation focused on supporting families dealing with facial differences, providing resources for both medical treatment and emotional support. The foundation's work had brought us into contact with hundreds of families whose experiences mirrored our own journey from shame to celebration. Parents who'd hidden their children's differences were learning to showcase them instead. Kids who'd been bullied for looking different were discovering that their distinctive features could be sources of strength rather than vulnerability. One of the foundation's most successful programs paired families with professional photographers who donated their time to create beautiful portraits of children with facial differences. The resulting images were shared with the family's permission on social media, creating a growing gallery of authentic beauty that challenged traditional standards of attractiveness. The response to these portraits was consistently overwhelming. Parents shared stories about their children's increased confidence after seeing themselves represented positively. Teachers reported improved classroom dynamics when students saw diversity celebrated rather than hidden. Even medical professionals noted that patients approached treatment decisions differently when they felt their differences were valued rather than pathologized. As Caleb approached his first birthday, I often found myself reflecting on how dramatically our lives had changed since that morning at Blue Moon Café, when Patricia first approached our table. The baby I'd once been ashamed to show the world was now inspiring millions of families to embrace authenticity over perfection. But the real victory wasn't professional, it was personal. I'd learned to trust my own instincts about my child's worth, instead of deferring to other people's narrow definitions of beauty. I'd discovered that love was a more reliable guide than fear when it came to protecting my son's self-esteem and confidence. The journey from hiding Caleb's birthmark to celebrating it publicly had taught me that most limitations are artificial constructs rather than natural realities. What society labeled as flaws could actually be distinctive features that set someone apart in the most positive ways. What families experienced as sources of shame could become foundations for pride and advocacy. On Caleb's first birthday, surrounded by friends and family who now saw him as the successful model he'd become rather than the different baby they'd once pitied, I watched him blow out his candle with the same crooked smile that had captivated photographers across the country. His birthmark caught the light from the party decorations, creating the kind of natural highlighting that had made him one of the most recognizable child models in America. Victoria was there, taking pictures with her phone but not immediately posting them to social media. She'd been spending less time curating her online image and more time experiencing life without the filter of digital perfection. Caleb's success had challenged her to question not just her opinions about beauty, but her entire relationship with authenticity and self-worth. "I keep thinking about what would have happened if you'd listened to me," she said as we watched Caleb open his presents. "If you'd hidden his birthmark or tried to have it removed, he never would have become who he is today." Her comment highlighted something I'd been reflecting on for months. The path from shame to celebration hadn't been just about changing my perspective on Caleb's appearance. It had been about learning to trust my own judgment over other people's opinions, to value authenticity over conformity, and to see differences as gifts rather than problems to be solved. The modeling career would eventually end, but the lessons would last forever. Caleb was growing up knowing that his differences were celebrated rather than hidden, that his distinctive features were assets rather than liabilities, that he belonged in any room he entered because he was exactly who he was supposed to be. More importantly, his journey was helping other children learn the same lessons. Every advertisement that featured his face, every billboard that showcased his birthmark, every commercial that celebrated his authentic appearance was sending a message to kids everywhere that beauty came in many forms, and that being different was something to embrace rather than hide. As I tucked Caleb into his crib that night, his first birthday crown still slightly askew on his head, I thought about the teenage girl who'd approached us in Pioneer Square. Her tears of recognition and gratitude had captured everything this journey had really been about. Not fame or money or professional validation, but the simple, powerful act of showing children that they were beautiful exactly as they were. The woman who had once researched laser removal procedures for her infant son was now watching that same child inspire a generation to embrace their differences instead of hiding them. The transformation from shame to pride had been complete, but the impact was just beginning. And as Caleb's breathing settled into the peaceful rhythm of sleep, I knew that the most important work we'd done together wasn't about building a modeling career. It was about changing how the world defined beautiful, worthy, and enough. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.